Okay, boys, here we go for another lesson. Now, this one is an absolutely critical one. If you manage anyone in your life, this is a critical skill so you aren't an asshole. And better yet, if you get managed by anyone, this critical skill will make sure that you aren't an idiot. And we're going to be talking about responsibility today. Now, this lesson absolutely follows through in all parts of our life. It doesn't matter. Just like when we were talking about leadership, our ability to coordinate action with others is our primary means of having success in our life. And within this lesson, I'm going to talk about the four parts of responsibility. If you don't have these four parts, it's impossible to hold a responsibility. If you can't hold responsibility, you're not going to be able to represent value for others, and you're going to be limited as to the teams that you're allowed to be on. Now, this is important to be understood both from a manager level who's passing responsibility to someone, as well as someone who is accepting responsibility from someone else. If you don't identify these four key parts, it's impossible for you to hold that responsibility and be able to fulfill on your commitments. So let's get right into it. The first thing we're going to do always is establish a clear distinction for a word, right? I've said responsibility a handful of times. And now at this point, what we're going to do is make sure that all of us have the same background, or at least a similar background of experience around it. Because the one thing I know for sure is not all of us look at responsibility the same way. We've all had different experiences in our life that have brought us to this point. For me, responsibility is having the power to act and making the commitment to meet a standard of performance. And this is a key distinction, right? There's three key parts to it. If you don't have the power to hold a responsibility, you can't hold the responsibility. If you haven't made a commitment to hold that responsibility, you can't hold a responsibility. And if you don't have some sort of standard to achieve, you can't hold a responsibility. Think of how many times in our lives we accept a responsibility without having one of these things. Now, being able to understand what parts of responsibility are necessary to be able to hold it gives us the ability to live up to our commitments. Now, before I go into that, I want to share a story about ultimate responsibility as a SEAL. So, you know those little hooks on your boots? Those little things the laces go in at the top of the boots. Usually there's 4 of them at the top of the boots. Well, those hooks, when you're on a skydive, can be very dangerous. So as a SEAL, we would often jump out at night in groups. And one of the risks jumping at night with other people is that you run into each other. Now, if I run into you under canopy and my hook on my boot grabs one of the lines going up to your parachute, we're both going to fall to our death. So in order to avoid that, before we went on missions where we were going to be jumping out of a plane, it was important for us to put a piece of tape over the hook on the top of our boot. So that was 8 pieces of tape on each boot. Now, what's important to think about that is the responsibility to tape our boots, right, seems trivial. But if we didn't do it, that was a life and death decision, right? If we failed to put tape on our boots, there's a chance that if something went wrong in a skydive, that we could kill ourselves or kill someone else simply by not holding this simple responsibility of putting a couple pieces of tape on our boots. Now, when you think about this from a bigger perspective, how many responsibilities do you think I had to hold, or one of my SEALs had to hold going into a mission? How many individual pieces of tape, if we were to say quote unquote pieces of tape, little tiny items that if not held could result in someone being injured or killed? And there's literally hundreds, if not thousands of them. And in order for this to work, we had to be very clear on how to pass responsibility, how to accept it, and how to hold it. And in order to do that, you have to understand the 4 parts of responsibility. To talk through that, I'm going to use a simple story. Imagine you were unable to swim, right? So if you got into the water, you're not going to be able to swim to shore. So you being in the water means drowning. Now, if you are in a rowboat in the middle of a big, huge lake, do you have the responsibility to keep the boat afloat? Now, when you think about this, the obvious answer is yes, I do if I want to stay alive. But the reality is, you don't actually have to hold the responsibility of keeping the boat afloat until it starts leaking. Right? As long as the boat's floating, everything's fine. But if you want to stay alive, if the boat starts to leak, you have to begin to hold or accept the responsibility of keeping the boat afloat. And so that leads us to our first part, awareness. You need to have awareness of your situation and awareness of the impact on you or on someone else of not holding the responsibility or holding it, right? Either way. So until my boots get wet sitting in that rowboat in the middle of that lake, until it starts to leak, until I have awareness that if I don't take action, some future is going to result that I don't want, I don't have to have a responsibility. I don't have to hold the responsibility. So the first part of responsibility is awareness. And that's the big answer to awareness is why. Why do I have to hold the responsibility? The next piece is a standard of performance, right? I need to know how much water I have to keep out of the boat before it becomes unstable and sinks. In order to hold the responsibility of staying alive in the middle of that lake, I have to have awareness that the boat's leaking, awareness that if the boat leaks, if it gets to a certain standard, right, a standard of performance, it's going to sink. The next piece is the power to act. Imagine if the boat was leaking at a gallon a minute and all I have is a teacup to try and scoop water out. I could have awareness that I need to keep the boat afloat, that I need to stop or at least keep water out of the boat. I could know the standard of performance is I got to keep it 1 foot from the edge of the boat. But if I don't have the power to remove enough water from the boat, then I can't possibly hold that responsibility. Now, if I have these three things, awareness, standard of performance, and the power to act, the last one is the most important one. And that's a commitment to holding the responsibility, right? You can see from this picture, does this guy have a commitment to rowing or keeping his boat afloat? Within these three things, or four things, awareness, why should I hold the responsibility of keeping the boat afloat? Standard of performance, at what level of water do I have to keep the water to so the boat doesn't sink? Power to act, the ability to get enough water out or stem the flow enough to keep it below the standard of performance. Those three things are the first part, but until I commit to holding that responsibility to keeping the water out of the boat, I can't possibly hold it. Now, how does this apply to being a manager or being someone that's being managed? Right? If I am passing responsibility to someone else, it's my responsibility until they have clarity on all four of those things. I first have to give them awareness as to why the responsibility is important to me, to them, to our purpose. I have to give them the standard of performance. I have to make sure that they have the power to meet that standard of performance. And I have to receive from them a commitment to holding that responsibility. Now, if I pass responsibility to someone and don't give them those four things, I'm an asshole, right? Like, I'm being a jerk. If I give you a responsibility and don't give you an awareness as to why, if I give you a responsibility but don't tell you what standard you have to achieve, if I give you a responsibility knowing that you don't have the power to meet it or not even checking on that, or if I pass a responsibility to you and don't actually receive your commitment to holding it, I'm being a jerk. Now, on the other side of it, if you're the one accepting responsibility and you don't have clarity on those four things, you're an idiot. What I mean by that is you're going to fail. If you don't know why, if you don't know the standard of performance, if you don't know if you actually have the power to meet that standard of performance, And if you don't clearly give your commitment to it, then you're an idiot, right? Because you can't hold a responsibility if you're missing one of those four things. Now, this is really important when it comes to my relationship with my wife and business partner. There's a lot of times where she will go to pass me a responsibility, right? To give me one. And I will have awareness as to why it's important. I'll know the standard of performance. I'll have the power to act, but won't make the commitment, right? And that could be because the power to act also depends on capability, as we talked about, power, and capacity. And so I'm not going to accept a responsibility that's going to break my other responsibilities. So one of the best things I can do is actually say no, because just accepting one, knowing or not being aware that another's going to break, actually puts her in just as bad a situation as if I said no. And so saying no is just as important in accepting responsibility as saying yes. So the core parts to this lesson is the fact that every time that a responsibility is not held, I guarantee that one of those four things was missing: awareness, standard of performance, power to act, or commitment. And so that's a little exercise you can do. On one side of it, when you're passing responsibility, actually write down all those four things and talk through it. But the more important one, the one that's really telling, is when was the last time you didn't hold a responsibility? When was the last time that someone that accepted a responsibility from you didn't hold it? Use those four things as a means to diagnose the reason why. Was it a lack of awareness? Was it non-clarity in the standard of performance? Was it that they thought they had the power to act, or maybe they didn't know what power they were going to need to act? Or did they not really make the commitment to hold that responsibility? So that's the lesson for today: responsibility. Now, this is a big one. This is one that you can use in a management position to make sure that you're not being a jerk, that you're actually handing someone responsibility in a proper way. This is good in a follower role where you're being asked to hold responsibility, and maybe your manager or the person that is asking you to hold them isn't giving you all the required parts. Or I use it as a parent all the time when I am explaining to my sons, one, what it means to hold a responsibility, and two, when they're accepting responsibility, I'm sure to go through these four things. So hopefully you enjoy that lesson. This is a good one, and this is one that's going to show up all over your life. With that being said, if there's anything we can ever do to help you hold the responsibility of leadership or management in your life, be sure to look us up and allow us to share some of these great lessons with you anytime. Don't forget to click to subscribe and turn on the notifications so you can get all of these great lessons that are going to keep coming week upon week.